Hello and welcome to another Office 365 Hours. My name is Christian Buckley. I'm the Microsoft Go-to-Market Director here at AvePoint and a Microsoft MVP and Regional Director. And I am joined today by Paul Dredge, Head of Technical at Hable, a UK-based Gold partner specializing in Microsoft 365 adoption and change management. He is an Office Apps and Services MVP like myself and a regular speaker on topics around Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and the Power Platform. So good morning, Paul.
How are we doing? You okay, Christian?
I'm doing well.
Good, very good.
I'm glad that we also have behind each of us similar backgrounds with Baby Yoda, so that's good.
Yeah, notice yours. Great stuff.
Good place a platform to start from. So
definitely
today we're discussing the topic of, have people really adopted Microsoft Teams? I think this is a great question. I'm looking forward to digging into this. So Paul, why don't we kick things off with this? So we're just talking about adoption. And Teams adoption specifically, what do you mean by adoption? And what does adoption look like within Microsoft Teams?
I guess it's an open question, isn't it, really? But I think good adoption is using the platform for what Microsoft have built the platform there. So using it for more than just meetings and chatting, it's actually taking advantage of the tools, resources, functionality that the software gives you. It's building that Workday hub is the way I see it is, if you truly adopted Microsoft Teams, it's probably the first application you open up on your working day, where you go into how you communicate internally with people, how you collaborate, how you find work on documentation, how you interact with other applications in 365 as well. I think that's true adoption of Microsoft Teams in my eyes.
Yeah, there's an interesting shift in the way that even Microsoft was looking at what they were calling adoption in the early days of Office 365. And so much of it was still around, and understandably for a company like Microsoft and an OEM like building out these solutions, they looked at adoption more in the realm of license sales. So they sold the product and like, hey, we're doing great. But what happened with Microsoft and got a lot of the leadership team to kind of wake up is that they sell these massive enterprise agreements, huge numbers, which they tell all the analysts, they tell all the world about, like, we did great on our sales. And yet when 3-4 years come and people were not renewing, or there are these large enterprise agreements, they're saying we really don't need that many of SharePoint or of Teams or whatever that the product was. It made Microsoft kind of wake up and understand that, no, we need to help people actually truly adopt and engage with the solution, actually use the software.
And I think that's a big shift to help organizations with the way Microsoft are doing things. So they're pushing it from the forefront. Like I said, back in the day, it was all around licensing, how many they've sold, and that was them being successful. Whereas now, as you know, Microsoft are monitored now on the usage and what people are actually using and how many users in that organization is using it and whether that's successful. And I think that's a massive change for partners like ourselves to go out there and help.
And for partners to do that, for companies to be looking at that as well. And looking and really truly looking at the analytics and understanding, because even within a company, you might look at different business units, different regions of the, where you have offices, where you have personnel, and usage patterns could be different. And what may appear, if you're not careful, and your analytics might show, hey, we see low adoption over here. No, they might just be using it differently. So analytics should be kind of the beginning of a conversation, but you should be careful about applying the same rules, the same view of what adoption is across all of those different entities.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a real good tool, isn't there, Microsoft offer. Might be jumping the gun a little bit, but the user adoption 365 Power BI dashboard they offer, which again gives businesses great insight. Like you say, that's the start of the story. So getting that vision onto that rather than diving in and saying, well, like I say, this department over here may not be using part of 365, but yeah, they might be using it in a different way or so on. Like meetings is a prime example. How do you know meetings are successful when people are adopting them? Is it because everyone's in meetings day in, day out? Is that a good use of meetings? That's up for debate.
Well, it's also understanding too, and obviously it's not just about the analytics of Teams and even the Microsoft stack, but being aware of what else is happening. Like I was working with a former client, which is a major university, and I knew firsthand that they purchased Microsoft 365 licenses for every staff member, every teacher, as well as had licenses for students to use. And yet, engaging with student groups on research projects, you saw that they were using a lot of G Suite tools, free tools and things that were out there. And so being aware of what other solutions are being used needs to be part of that as well. When you work with clients, when you talk about specifically about adoption, what are some of those common patterns and behaviors that you see, and the gaps in the usage of Teams?
I guess the common thing we see and a lot with customers is you'll speak to them, you'll have a conversation and be like, well, how are you using Teams? How are you adopting it? Like, oh yeah, we've adopted it, brilliant. Everyone in our organization is using it. Okay. The next question, well, what are you doing in Teams? And the common thing we see is, oh, we use it for chat and we use it for meetings. So they're using it as a Skype replacement. That isn't for me. It's good in a way, but for me, it's not a full good adoption of using the platform that's there.
But if you go in and look at, so one, there's the competitive landscape. And, of course, Microsoft is doing a lot of marketing to go and compete against these single solutions like Zoom, for example, that does like one aspect of that. Slack does one aspect of that. And yet Teams does a broad range of things. But a lot of the marketing, a lot of the messaging was around that. Early on, when Teams was first launched, and there was you probably experienced the same thing. There were us that were on the collaboration side, the SharePoint side, the broader small c collaboration, the everything that's kind of encompassed within that. Yet so much of Microsoft's attention was over on the unified communication side, the Skype people, the Skype MVPs. And that side of it, I kept like finding myself like inviting myself to Skype MVP calls, be like, why are you not involving those of us that are on the collaboration side? We are an equal partner in what Teams is supposed to be. So my impression was that Microsoft messaging and a lot of that initial focus was focused just on that chat and meeting capability. And if that helped, confuse clients, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, it's not a poor use of Teams at all in that manner. It's just that they pick up bad habits. And what we tend to find is that, yes, they're using Teams, but they're not using it to what it can do. They find themselves in chat, and that's how they're working. They work in chat in Teams. And that's where it can get confusing. People feel overwhelmed, like, oh, I'm in so many different chat conversations, and I don't know where to find this and that, and so on. You're like, well, have you seen this thing that's actually called Teams? Part of Teams, which I hate. I don't know why Microsoft ever named it this way, Teams in Teams. It confuses the hell out.
Team and Teams. Yeah, I know. And then you have team sites. I know, coming from the SharePoint side of things as well. It's not confusing at all. Good job, Microsoft.
Yeah. So glad they did that. But yeah, when you show them the capabilities of actually working in a team workspace, we'll call it, then that sort of blows their mind. Some of these people are like, oh, never knew you could do this. And it's just, like you say, it's down to that messaging that was initially put out. I mean, all the TV adverts you saw beginning of COVID, when there was a big push on Teams, it mostly, like I say, it was meetings, people calling people attending, firing up a chat. And that was the selling point of it. And I think it did kick off in that manner.
Right. And some of that initial messaging was Microsoft Teams is the hub for teamwork, which it really does provide that capability. One of the things that I loved with the launch, and I was independent, had my own company at the time with the launch. That was 5.5 years ago, roughly, when that launched. And so I started using it, Teams with my little company from day one. And so when I'd bring in, personnel, I had consultants as I worked with partners. and I would leverage my licensing. Well, the thing that was fantastic was going and creating a shared workspace. I also used the word workspace instead of a team. So a team's workspace. But then I would go and plug in as tabs, like every site, every tool, everything that was, web-based, so that I could link in there, so that when I went in with this group of consultants on a research project, we had in our team every external resource that was necessary for this project, for that workspace. And that was the first time where, I mean, look, we were trying to do that with SharePoint, with other portal software for years, creating this environment where, IT would have to get involved to go in and extend the capabilities and add these other tools, or where IT failed to be quick enough in responding to those requests, or said, hey, we can't add this capability in. What would happen is people would go around IT and they would go do it themselves, sign up for that third-party project management tool, this other tracking tool, these other capabilities. At least with Teams, you might still have some of these third-party, resources that you leverage. You can have it all in one location.
And that's a great example of using it. Like you said, bringing in externals and so on like that, which, again, looking at adoption, a lot of organizations out there don't even know that capability exists, and they live in emails and still pinging stuff off, may go and use a third-party file sharing software because they don't understand that those extra capabilities are there. So I know you asked the question at the beginning about, well, what does adoption of Teams look like? You explained a good adoption of Teams is like utilizing what functionality it has and available for you to use as a user.
That's why looking at a lot of those stats, and of course it's now part of, the insights, which are part of Microsoft Viva, which, look at a lot of the stats, is looking what's happening across the rest of the Microsoft stack to understand that, well, there might be lower usage of the out-of-the-box Teams features, but then high usage of these other platforms within the stack. And then you as an organization need to make a decision of, hey, is this something we need to move people away from those things? Or, hey, we understand that this business unit has lower usage. That's not a bad thing because they're doing more in SharePoint, or they're very Yammer focused, or they're over in Dynamics doing completely other things, and they come and utilize Teams when they need to, maybe just as a chat and for the meetings capabilities.
Yeah.
Well, what you talked about the adoption resources. That's actually something Microsoft has really turned this around over the last few years. They've done a great job at a lot of the documentation. Of course, just to clarify, a lot of that documentation, like out on adoption.microsoft.com and elsewhere, is community created, community generated. But what are kind of some of your go-to resources? What do you leverage?
I guess looking at resources, I mean, us at Hable, we use the ProSite ADKAR approach, which is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, and the circle around that adoption of it. So we don't tend to use a lot of the resources around it. We build our own resources in that sense, but it's the common things. So it doesn't matter what kind of resource you use, whether it's built in-house by a partner, whether you're using Microsoft resources. It's the key things for me for a successful adoption of anything, whether it's Teams or whatever you're trying to implement, is building the awareness around it and desire. Then for me, those first two steps of that ADKAR approach are the key, no matter what sort of adoption plan you're looking at. Because if people in your organization aren't aware of what's in it for them, what the change is, why it's changing, and so on, building up that desire around it, like getting that excitement up, it's going to fall down because people need to buy into what you're getting. If they don't buy into it, then they're not going to be bothered. They're people busy in their work. They don't like change. No one likes change. Right. Even people who are change practitioners don't like change. Don't like changing anything. But you need to get that buy-in. And then the next steps along the way for me is like clear comms. Something so simple as sending out emails through it, or Teams messages, or communicate, whatever it's resource you're using, but having clear comms and being, transparent about what's happening, where things are at, what's happening next. And I think those things there are the key things for me for helping with adoption, no matter what resources you're using out there.
Well, and that I think that communication strategy is where so many organizations fall down.
Yeah.
In my experience, has been just that they're not consistent. Like they're great up at the beginning with the launch of that and do that initial training, and then it just kind of trails off and it falters, and people forget, oh, do we still have that? Are we still using that? And so of course you have like I couldn't imagine not having and utilizing Teams now. I use Teams, SharePoint, and Yammer, as well as Outlook. I'd say those are my 4 primary tools. I do everything in every day. I'm in all 4 of those. And I couldn't see how I would get most of what I need to do during the day done if not for all 4 of those tools. They all play a role. But even so, I'm constantly reminded, like, oh yeah, I forgot that those resources were available. I forgot that we went and extended it in this way. And so having those reminders, like we have just a practice in our company at AvePoint, we have an email that goes out, automated weekly, that has like 3 tasks to go and do, and is constantly pointing back to resources and places. Sometimes I look at the list and be like, oh yeah, I'm aware of that. But always pay attention. It's kind of like the Cortana, well now the Viva,
Yeah.
the task reminders and,
Yeah.
and the helps. And sometimes you look at those like, oh yeah, did it. And sometimes I look at those little reminders of like, yeah, I completely forgot about that. Let me go do that, or add it as a task.
Yep.
And you need to have a similar strategy for no matter how well you think people know the Office suite and how engaged you think they are within Teams. Healthy reminders. That's just a good, like collaboration, best practice of you constantly reseeding, reminding, and it's a nurturing campaign, to put it in marketing speak, is that ongoing trickle of information.
Yeah, I think it's not trying to do too much at once as well in some cases. So it's like small changes in how people are working can make that big change at the end. So it's doing those incremental changes that then will make that big change. And something you said there about the reminders, it's habit, isn't it? A lot, and all adoption is around habits. How humans work is on habit. Only today we were talking about, we had a nutrition specialist in at Hable today talking about healthy eating helps you with work, helps your brain, and going through what good foods, bad foods, and things like that. And we had a conversation about it. It's like, we know all this, you know this stuff, but you're not in a habit of doing it. And
right.
that's the thing. It's same with adoption and using Teams and things like that. It's trying to break bad habits to make good habits, and that's one of the key things. So for example, if you're constantly living in chat and in meetings in Teams, you need to break that habit to then look at, I'm going to go and work in a team channel and have that conversation. I don't need to have an hour meeting, 45-minute meeting. I can post a channel message and we can have a conversation back and forth in there that takes 5 minutes. And we can get the same result sometimes, not saying all the times, but sometimes you get the same result. You're not then isolated in a chat somewhere. It's visual, working out loud within your team space. And that's right. That's the common thing we see is breaking those things people pick up early on to make a change in how they're doing things.
I've seen Microsoft people that have that like the coffee mug that says, like that email could have been a Teams chat, or that could have been a meeting kind of thing. And I saw somebody had one that said like that lengthy Teams chat could have been an email, So I've seen it both ways. But I think the takeaway from all of those messages combined is that there's not one way that works. And sometimes having that nurturing, that trickle of information of other things, of best practices, can remind you of the things that you used to know, and just to go and to constantly kind of revise and be thinking about other ways of doing, so that we don't get into a rut, whether it's a rut, where we're relying too much on email or other external communications. We need to bring it over to Teams, or sometimes we're doing things in Teams where You could have just picked up a phone call, or now I do more. I never use my phone. I just, like I had somebody just yesterday. We're sitting there having a discussion, and he calls my phone, and then he complains that I had it go, immediately to voicemail. I said, because we're in a call. I'm in a meeting. I have it, like, I don't want that interruption.
Yeah.
I'm like, but I mean, you see my presence awareness, I'm in something, so kind of all those things, just for people to adjust their lives, to go in and put the automations in place, to know that, hey, if I'm in a meeting, that with the link with my phone, you'll roll over to voicemail, or if if my schedule is aware of this, or sometimes look at this back and forth threaded discussion and realize, hey, we just need to go have a meeting, or summarize this, let's just do a phone call around that. It's one of the things I'm a huge fan of is the Friday brown bag lunch. It's where there's somebody's presenting on a topic where they've kind of gone through and talked about their experience. Here's how they're leveraging the technology. I wish more companies, more groups would do something like this. And it's not to say that every topic, everybody needs to be there. I might look at a topic on a Friday and be like, I know all about that. I don't need to participate within that, or that's an area I'm not building power apps right now. I don't need to do a deep dive into that. But other times I see something and be like, ooh, that's something that I might have an opinion about, or I could really learn something. But again, make that part of the culture where we're sharing our best practices. We're learning, even if two people show up for that, the person who captured all of that, cataloged it, record that session, it become part of the knowledge base for the organization of, hey, here's our culture of collaboration. Here's how we can better leverage the technology.
Yeah, and that's key, isn't it? It's like you never finish. There's not an ending point, is there? With technology, especially with Microsoft technology, it updates so blooming often. But there's, I don't know anyone that has done a rollout of Teams or looking at using Teams, whatever, then sits down 6 months, 12 months down the line, and be like, oh, we did a good job, we're finished.
We're done. Yeah.
I mean, if you do that, you've done it wrong. But it's not. It's like you say, it's continuous. You mentioned the brown bag doing the weekly, knowledge sort of lunch and learns types of things people do as well, and it's just constant. And that's what people need to realize, that there's not an end. You don't get to an end. I was speaking to a customer recently, and they're like, right, our launch finishes in 2 months' time. Someone's like, oh, what are you going to do? It's like, oh, I'm going to go and take a long holiday. It's like, but it's not finished. It's not, your launch is finished, but you've still got to continue on further down that journey and keep moving forward.
I'm grateful I learned that early in my career, at the end of a huge project. I was on part of a massive project, 18 months. And then after that, the delivery of it, then there was, that was just the go live of the systems portion of it. Then there was training schedule, there was the comms schedule, there was doing Q&As, doing follow-ups. We actually looked at, back then, some of the adoption metrics around that. And from that, we upgraded kind of the overall, like, how are people leveraging this? We changed features, we built other automations around that. So there's a ton that you can learn, like having just rolled something out to refine something. But you're right. I mean, the culture of your organization is constantly evolving. The needs of your business, the makeup of your customers and their input, all of those things are constantly changing. And Microsoft is constantly adding to, taking away, making changes within that, all of which mean that, in my view, successful adoption is as much about the change management process and creating a culture around change.
Yeah. There's lots of things you can do along the journey. I mean, when we're looking at some of the most successful changes we've seen going in an organization, it's always had a champions program alongside it.
Yep.
And some sort of support network, maybe not champions, but some sort of tribe support, whatever it may be, who are those early adopters early on, but then take it through the organization. And like I say, building that culture, and they're the ones that can help drive that.
Yeah, that's I'm passionate about that area as well. Is you find people that are willing to go above and beyond their job description to help other people adopt certain parts of the technology. Like, as an organization, we should go out of our way to support those individuals that are going above and beyond in those areas. And yeah, because it could be, as something as simple as just, giving them kudos, recognition for playing that role. It could be that more formally supporting that mentoring or training that they're doing on the side and offering that out as a lunch and learn or as an internal webinar. But looking for those kinds of opportunities. Again, I look at that as, there's a great opportunity to set up some reward system for like, hey, if we leverage and we showcase your tip, we'll give you a $15 Amazon gift card or Starbucks gift card or whatever it is, to build some motivation into that so that people are thinking about, hey, I could do more to share some of the ways that we're leveraging the technology. I love that idea. That's the gamification of collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen it work well where I can't remember when it was, but it was an organization I spoke to, and they sort of did a similar thing, but rather than rewards, they rewarded them with extra holiday. So if you joined the Champions program, you got so many extra holiday, and then the more people you mentored throughout that program, they gave you extra days for every other. I can't remember the exact figures, like 10, 15, 20, however many people you mentored, and you got those extra days. And for that person, obviously it's not costing the organization anything in a sense, but for that person to feel that value that, oh, look, I'm being noticed, I want to go and help people, and then people seeing that and be like, well, I want to be a champion, I want to go and help people, I want to drive that.
Well, I like to say that, hey, we're there are altruistic reasons for going and doing and sharing and that kind of thing. And I think there for a lot of ways, but there's nothing wrong with going and building a recognition system in there. Some organizations, like more sales centric organizations, are very leadership board driven and just showing like, hey, number of tips shared and just having, that's all it is. And maybe at the end of every quarter, the person who's the top sharer, win something or get the vacation day or whatever that is. So yeah, there's a lot of those kinds of gamification techniques can be motivating for a lot of people. Other people will say, like, look, I don't need any of that. I just want to share what I've learned. If that can help other people, that's fine too. And so I like I love the reward aspect of that, but giving multiple options for reward. Like, I don't need another clothing item with my company's branding on it. I'd rather have $100 in my name to a charity of my choice, kind of thing. So there's a lot of ways that you can motivate as part of that adoption strategy.
Definitely. And like I say, you want people to be doing it for the right reason, because that'll make them a good champion. So the little reward is that added extra, but definitely attracts people.
Exactly. Well, Paul, really appreciate your time this morning. And this is all, great information. I know that as one of the AvePoint community champions, and you're very involved in, creating other content. If you want to find out more about Paul, I know that you're out on all the social networks and Hable as well, links that'll be within the blog post. And for those that are watching, if you've not already done so, you can subscribe to the Office 365 Hours. That will send you notifications for our shows that are on the first and third Wednesday of every month at 11 a.m. Eastern. So, Paul, thanks again for your time, and everybody, thanks for watching.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.